Shit on you and your devil. Chapter 12. The woods, like most of village, was the home of a big goblin family and some other creature that I'm not going to mention because it's not relevant now. Hundreds of goblins lived happily at the village. They had their little houses made of logs with their bark pine roofs, their clothes knitted of sparto grass and wildflowers, their cakes and sweets made of exotic fruits. Life at the village was very happy, not quiet, happy. At the end, it was a goblin's village, therefore peace and calm impossible. Things flew on the air and disappeared from one place to appear in the other, and all the hundreds of thousands things you can imagine, a goblin of whichever gender and ideology could do all day without measure or rest, but happy. The goblins are beings that lived years and years and more years. In fact, they keep their count in a different way not to get bored following hours. Apart from being more reliable, useful and ancient. And as much as they went out to the neighbor villages and they messed with the men when they were chopping wood and with the women when they were cooking the stew, everything tires at the end. Of course, young people find everything exciting and enjoyable, but after 700 years, a rolling bucket was a rolling bucket, and a flying donkey was a flying donkey. The old men of the village were depressed. The old women were about to have an acute homesickness attack, and the youngsters were one step far from being old. So they decided to make something to move away from the monotony that having a so well-organized life brought. Because goblins were very fond of organizing, drawing and painting, and making musical instruments, and little cute houses, and divine suits, but organizing the most. It was Arume's idea, who was born the most organizer of the village. "We can go to America," she said during lunch. At first, nobody heard her. Nobody listened to her because she was also fond of having ideas. "We can paint the shutters in green. We can change the curtains. We can..." She was like that, and they loved her, but had learned not to pay attention because she kept them busy the whole day. And goblins were very organized, but lazy the most. To that place, what is its name? She was rambling aloud, thinking they were listening. Sure, the place where they do this life in 1 hour thing, where people don't talk. What's its name? Hollywood, Solport told her-in-law. He read her mind. They were that kind of revolting couples that finished each other's sentences. But people was having lunch, because they could do anything but cooking the best. The cod pie smell reached the Ortugal Cape, and the world felt hungry, not knowing well why. That's it, Hollywood, where it's always sunny. It was in that moment when all the goblins at the table, without exception, planted their eyes on her. One place where it was always sunny. That was really interesting, and not that stupid thing of people walking so fast they hadn't time to talk, and that the days went by without nights, without breakfast, and without eating sometimes. There aren't enough trunks. There aren't enough trunks. Amenthor repeated. He was all nervous and impatient, all worries and misery. If there weren't enough, it was his fault, because he was the carpenter. They all thought hearing him matter. He understood quite well what that looks meant, but they couldn't ask him to do the whole work on his own. Were his fault Arume's crazy ideas? What is more, was his fault everyone had decided to pay attention to her? Why did they all make what she told them to do? He wasn't jealous. He wasn't willing to work. Actually, the trunks weren't enough. They had to put the trouble off a month to give time to Amenthor to make the missing trunks, because they didn't help him. It wasn't their thing. Each one did what they got. They didn't think they had collected so many things in the hundreds of years they had been living in the woods. The eldest lady in the village remembered they had arrived with one pot, a blanket, and no more. How much had they to put together? Times had changed. They all told her. She just knew she was old, not silly. Kids didn't do more than mess around. They ran down the hill, ran up the hill. They opened the trunks and took the things out. And that counting, they clothed them well. Kids learned what they wanted because there was no way they learned something useful. And they told it to them times and times. Don't go swimming today. Today you have to be here in an hour. But they didn't know about watching the clock. What did they know about anything? Some of them stood because their parents catch them by the hat before they got to leave. But they couldn't catch them all. Some of them slipped away, properly speaking, 3 of them. But nobody realized them, so they were happy. The parents, because they thought the kids had paid attention, and the girls, because they thought their parents hadn't discovered them. And not to forget Trebon. Trebon is a key factor in this story. He isn't a goblin, but he really is a key factor in this story. He's a cold, overwhelming, and bad-tempered being. He always has an eye for the main chance, always muttering, not the funny goblins muttering. He is a sulked on his own. He had no goal in life, at least not known goals. What he had was an obsession. Blot out all the goblins and whomever had something to do with them in any moment. Nobody knew where that obsession came from. We only knew that it was an obsession very obsessive. He spent the days plotting terrible traps and malevolent plans. The goblins, in their happy unconsciousness, didn't pay attention to him. Actually, Trebon's plans were so bad that never were successful, and they didn't notice his insistence. Sometimes it rained unexpectedly, and they had to celebrate a dance at the big house. Only that far Trebon's rage reached. But years and years of observation turned Trebon into an expert on the goblins' culture, on their lifestyle, and, in short, on everything that horrible and repulsive creatures did. We got to know Trebon is as old as the eldest goblin, and I even should say a bit more. But without rheumatism or wrinkles, what we know as aging well, he knew knew that shrimp monsters were planning something, and it must be important because they all were in on it. Those trunks must contain the famous end of the rainbow gold. Almost for sure. They didn't do more than carry boxes and boxes. Yes, it was the moment. He kept it for an occasion like that. A big occasion. The occasion. He had been rhyming a spell full of letters and feelings, ingenuity and wickedness. Spell! In some moment, when the boxes were all together, when they stopped carrying the gold, when everything was ready, they could do the trip spell to hide it wherever the rainbow ended. Then, in that moment, he could say the spell, and he could change the trip destination, taking for himself all the gold. Yes, that was the spell. That was the occasion. Trevon peeped eagerly each goblin's going and coming, each step and each blinking, until the day arrived. He realized because they were gathering together step by step at the big house, happily and cheerfully as always. So concentrated he was on scrubbing his hands with the greedy that he neither noticed the little goblins running away to the river. And who knows if that was the only mistake he made in his perfect plan. He plenty knew the trip spell. He only had to say his at the same time, and just like he had written it. He had kept it in a golden jewel case, fine brass jewel case, but it looked like gold, so polished it was. The jewel case was locked with a key that hung from his neck. Who was going to want to rob it? He thought that everybody wanted, and he wore it close to his throat, so nobody could take it from him. He didn't realize that the world had more to think about than a few lines written with meticulous but incomprehensible handwriting. In theory, everything was ready. We must say he had never tried the spell out. He didn't want to arouse suspicions interrupting the little jumps in space of that dwarf of the goods. They seemed stupid, but the experience had shown they always get their own way. Bling! Plonk! Hollywood! There we go! The old goblin said before the attentive looks of the whole house. And before she said, plonk, blink, we go there, Trevon shouted with all his strength the opposite spell. Splash, splash, I kicked your arms! And he raised his arms victorious, and his malevolent laugh could be heard all along the village and far along. And he looked through the telescope and saw no goblin left at the big house, and especially no trunk. He scrubbed his hands sweating green and giving off unbridled emotion by the eyes. Yes, it had worked. It had completely worked. Completely and totally. Excuse me? How did Trevon know it had worked? Well, because the goblins weren't at the big house. Excuse me? They might be in Hollywood. Excuse me? What do you mean? But how? Fine. That was an error of judgment, but he worked hard, and we had to value it. Poor thing! It almost was the only mistake he made. He didn't think about the way of checking his trick's success or failure. But it doesn't mean he was unsuccessful. He could go to Hollywood and verify it, but he didn't even know where it was. He thought it was a village of around Ireland. All the places ended with wood were around there. But it was too cold and there were big trolls. Plus, he was almost completely sure of his success. And it wasn't a vain certainty. He had a strong reputation. He had been successful. An absolute conviction. He had been successful. It couldn't be other way. Oh gosh! Give me your hand! I'm falling down! He said, laughing, pretending he had slipped from a higher rock. Be careful, there is a woman down there, the other said. I knew you had taken it, Lois said, smiling, leaned against a car parked next to mine. I knew you were following me, I answered. I didn't take anything, you'd better have this clear. Sure, he said, implying he didn't believe me. See you. I waved goodbye, getting into the car. You know, I gave in to the temptation. I admitted it. He confessed. The guy told me I could pass his subject if I gave him the goblin. I smiled and waved goodbye, not saying a word. I returned to normal. Although, I must say, I go around from time to time to say hello. Goblin sickness, maybe.